Welcome to Tell Me About It, a podcast by SLPs for everybody. My name is Francie.
And my name is Maggie.
And today we have a special guest. Our friend Chloe, who is an early childhood SLP, is here to talk with us.
Hi, I am very excited to be here on Tell Me About It. I am an SLP. I've been an SLP for the last 5 years. I've been in early childhood education for the last 4. So I work with 3 to 5-year-olds in the school setting, and every day is an adventure. So I'm excited to come on here and talk about it.
Yay! Well, we're really happy that you're on with us today to be our very first ever guest. Me and Chloe went to grad school together, and then both wound up moving to the area that we live in now after school, and got to reconnect and be friends and colleagues after school too, which has been really fun. So yeah. But that being said, Chloe, can you tell us about kind of like your journey to becoming an SLP? Like, what made you want to do this job? How did you wind up where you are today?
I really love this question because I feel like I went a little bit of a different route than typical. I started off going into just early childhood education to be a teacher. I've always loved preschool, but I thought I wanted to be a teacher. My mom was a kindergarten teacher. It's just in the blood. And so I went to school, and I was all the way into my senior year of education before I really learned what speech language pathology was and what they did and how they supported kids. And I was fascinated by that because what I really loved about education was I really loved language and literacy, which is why I was leaning towards kindergarten or preschool. I really loved those like foundational skills and how having a strong foundation of language and literacy can really set you up for success in so many ways. And I wanted to be a part of that. And so I started looking into speech language pathology a little bit more because we really are the language experts. And we play a huge part in literacy, like you guys mentioned in your previous episode. And so I finished my student teaching, and I got my education degree. I am certified to teach birth through 3rd grade. And I essentially went right back into school. Unfortunately, our grad program had stopped accepting accelerated students. So I had to do 2 more years to get the correct undergrad in communicative science before going into grad school. And I am grateful every day for that decision, even though it took me a lot longer to get those degrees than typical. I feel like I have a strong understanding of just kind of how education works from a well-rounded view, which is why I love being in the classroom. And I am where I always wanted to be, in the preschool room, just as a specialist instead of a teacher, because I really just love supporting that early language and building those literacy skills and giving kids a strong foundation for when they move on. So that's a little bit about how I got into the field.
Yeah, I met you my junior year of undergrad, which is like the point where our program kind of switched fully into communication science disorders only classes. And yeah, you've always had a really interesting perspective as someone with that educator background too, because I feel like people can get into speech pathology like through a variety of different avenues. And sometimes it can go a little, especially I think when we're still getting our schooling, it can go a little more healthcare bent. But a lot of SLPs work in schools, and we work every day with other educators, with teachers. And so it is nice to have kind of that perspective and background too. And just something I know about you as your friend is that you are very passionate too about kind of the social justice piece of education and literacy also. And so I feel like that gives you a really well-rounded perspective on that too.
Absolutely. That was a huge driving factor in where I wanted to work, for one, and why I wanted to work in early learning is that social justice piece and just the statistics behind the crime rate and reading rates and all of those pieces that come into play was something that I really felt like I could make a difference, even if it's just helping one kid at the preschool level get on track to where they need to be before moving on, will help give that child success for their whole life. So, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. We kind of talked in our episode about literacy a couple weeks ago about literacy as like a civil right. And that's 100%. We were kind of talking about it as like for our kids and adults eventually who have disabilities that are maybe more impactful on their life and more impactful to their independence. We were talking about literacy as that like civil right and also as a survival skill. But even for kids that may just have like a quick stop in speech therapy, or kids that are only on our radars or on our caseloads for a little while and are not, you know, kind of dealing with lifelong changes coming from disability, it is still a game changer. Like it, you know, to put it mildly, literacy is one of the most important skills that kids can have.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And I remember one of the driving things that hit home really hard for me was learning about the functional literacy rates of people in prison. And it was like, I don't remember the exact number, but it's crazy high. It was something like 90% of inmates are functionally illiterate, which is so alarming to me. And I just feel like that pipeline starts so young to be able to catch kids early and give them the support they need was something I felt very, very passionate about.
Yeah, Chloe, I know actually we all follow Dr. Juvenile Forensic SLP, who I get a lot of my statistic from about communication disorders within carceral spaces. And I feel like that you nailed it. I mean, early childhood is such a vital service because it can close gaps that will otherwise only get wider throughout a person's lifetime. So anyways, I'm so glad you're here so we can talk about early childhood because it is so, so, so important for the rest of people's lives.
Yeah. Yes. So I guess, do you want to, you don't have to be like specific, like what building you work at or anything like that, but like, what is your job now? Kind of who do you work with? What does your day-to-day as an early childhood SLP look like?
And what does therapy look like? Because therapy delivery looks different at early childhood than it does up here in elementary.
Yeah, great. So currently, the school district that I work for, we do have a dedicated early childhood center where the whole building is all preschool classrooms specifically designed for early childhood. And then we have what we call satellite locations. So there are some preschools located in the elementary schools. I am one of the SLPs located in the elementary schools. So I have to travel. I travel between 2 elementary schools right now, and I only provide services to my early childhood kiddos. So again, that 3 to 5 year old range at the preschool level. And so I typically, depending on the day, I run on like 2-day schedules. So I see kids probably twice a week. Most of the kids on my caseload run from 30 minutes a week to 90 minutes a week, depending on their needs. And so that typically turns out to 2 sessions a week. And in those sessions, again, depending on the needs of the child, something that I think is a little bit different in the early childhood level is I do a lot of services in the classroom, which I know you guys do in your like your life skills classrooms. But I do a lot of services in the classroom because a lot of what my kids are working on is functional communication. So they're working on just making simple requests. So we're working on greeting peers. We're working on simple building language skills. And I think that that's something that's kind of a misnomer, because when I tell people I'm a speech therapist, they always go to, oh, you help kids with their R's, or you help kids with the stutters, which is what we typically think of. I would say less than 25% of my caseload is working on speech articulation. And that is due to our state criteria. It's very, very hard to qualify at the early childhood level. So a lot of my sessions I spend in the classroom working on modeling in the moment appropriate functional communication, whether it's protesting an activity they don't like, whether it's requesting assistance with something that they need, whether it's just making comments during play. That's what a lot of my sessions look like. I do have a space where I can pull them out of the classroom to work on things, and that is going to look very much like just play. I always request, if I'm going to have a special space, I need to be in the floor. We are young, we are in the floor, we are playing, we are loud a lot of the times. And so if someone were to poke their head through my door or look in the window, it's going to look ridiculous. And I know you guys have talked about that before too, but play is the work of children. And if you don't have a good connection with that child through play, they're not going to be learning. They're not going to be wanting to communicate with you. So that's a little bit different than the older grades. I still do have structure. Like, they're not allowed to just do whatever they want in my room. There are boundaries in what we can play with. There are boundaries in where we can play. Like Maggie, you've mentioned in some of the earlier episodes, it's not child gets to do whatever they want. I will follow the child's lead during play, but they have boundaries on what they're supposed to do. And most of my kids know what they are. Most of them.
Yeah. Sometimes I remind myself, I'm like, if they're pushing boundaries, they must know what the boundaries are. I'm like, okay, so you know.
And then they kind of pause and look at me. I know that they're not supposed to be taking the curtain off the shelf. Like,
So I think you said play is the work of children. And that's a quote from Maria Montessori, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so this is another thing that I love about you. You have opened my eyes to, or you have like changed my opinion on Montessori education, because this is a self-call out. I thought Montessori was kind of BS for a really long time, because I think I had only seen examples of it done poorly, where it was basically just chaos. Or it was not instructive. Like, there was no, I guess, kind of, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Yeah, I guess just not instructive. So then I found out that you had like a Montessori background, and that was something that was really important to your therapy ideology. And like, over time, I have come to appreciate that style of teaching and learning more because of you, honestly, and just like how you utilize it too.
That's a great point. So when I was doing my many years of schooling work, I worked in a Montessori preschool, and I was an assistant a couple years. I was a lead for a year while I was doing my undergrad in a Montessori classroom. Disclaimer here, I'm not Montessori certified. It was just a Montessori school. I had some Montessori coaches, but I myself was not Montessori certified. And I do hold some cognitive dissonance with that. There are a lot of aspects of it that I really love. And part of that is that teaching independence, the kind of free choice and play that is associated with it. However, some of the disclaimers that I have is a lot of times Montessori classrooms are expected to be quiet because children work independently. And as a speech and language therapist, I like talking. I like noise. I like loud, which is typically frowned upon in a very traditional Montessori room. There's not a lot of pretend play, but there are a lot of really important aspects from the Montessori method that I do carry into my practice now. And a lot of that stems to teaching your child independence. They are capable of so much.
Yeah, I think as with anything, especially those methods or ideologies that kind of exist on one end of a spectrum, there are some things that you kind of have to take and leave. You know, we can say like, there's really good things about the Montessori approach to things, and there are things that either don't work well for everyone, don't work well for kids with disabilities, et cetera, don't work well from a language development standpoint. So, but yeah, I was like totally out on Montessori, and then I'm like, well, Chloe really likes it, and like, I think she's a really good speech therapist, so maybe there's something to that.
It's all about give and take, which is kind of my approach, which other SLPs might not love, but that's kind of my approach when it comes to speech and language approaches as well. Is it's kind of like, if this aspect of this approach is working, great, but if this aspect isn't, do something else, which is kind of how I, especially in the early childhood years, is how I kind of take that approach. Same with preschool philosophies.
So I was going to ask, I wanted to know kind of what are some of your favorite parts of your job, and what are some of the challenging parts as well? I know that there's probably a long list for both of those things, but yeah, what are some things that you really, really enjoy, and maybe some things that are kind of difficult?
Some of the things that I really, really enjoy, and this is going to be kind of cheesy, but I do really enjoy those small wins, like when a child does something for the first time. That is an amazing moment. Or we've been working on something for a long time, and even if it's not quite there, but it's starting to emerge, just those small wins are something that we focus on all the time. And I really love just celebrating those. I really love the school culture. I feel very lucky. I have a really great school team, and just the atmosphere of working on a team of people that are all there because they want the best for these kids, and they will advocate for kids, regardless if it means pushing back against administration, having hard conversations with parents. I think that is an atypical thing that I like about my job. But I just really like being in a space where we're all on the same page and advocating for kids. And then, what was the other half of that question? I was just thinking
some
about
things that are challenging.
Oh,
or,
right.
Yeah.
Oh, things that are challenging. Absolutely. Some of the biggest challenges are the roadblocks we have in the school system. There are, and I know you guys have talked about this extensively, but the roadblocks we have being bound by state criteria, or the roadblocks that I have in the fact that my schedule does not accommodate for a student to maybe get all of the therapy that I really want to give them because my caseload's too high. So these kind of systematic barriers that we have in place are so frustrating for me on a day-to-day basis. For example, there's a lot of evidence that shows kids with apraxia of speech require shorter, more frequent sessions. And because of my caseload needs, my travel needs, even if I give kids the minutes in their IEP to accommodate that, I cannot physically be there because of the roadblocks that the school system has. And so those are some of the most frustrating things about my job. It's almost never the kids themselves, while there are lots of challenges in behaviors with the kids themselves. part of the most frustrating thing for me is those things that are out of my control. All I can really do is email Asha if I really want to advocate for it, or email the school board. But those are some of the biggest challenges in early childhood, because I do feel like it's very different at the early childhood level than it is in other things. And for example, I don't know if you guys have talked about caseloads on here already, but
not a lot.
I think ASHA recommends, our governing board recommends 35 to 50 kids. However, there is no cap, and schools can just give you however many kids they want, however many kids there is a need for, and there's no weighted system in that. So if you have 30 kids that are all really high needs, whether that's because they have autism, they're medically fragile, or just really disruptive behaviors, versus 30 kids who are just going to be speech itinerant with no other things going on, your caseload looks very different. And balancing that in a schedule, in early childhood, we often have reduced hours, is my biggest frustration with my job right now, my biggest challenge.
Yeah, it's really hard. I have worked in early childhood, and I actually am working currently part-time in early childhood too. And you have to work around, a lot of programs are half-day programs. If they are not, there's usually a nap time or rest time period that you have to work around. So that's like, it's great if your caseload can accommodate that, because you're like, ooh, paperwork time. But if you have a bajillion kids that you need to see, then having like, only 3 hours that they are actually at school per day to work in, 30 minutes to 45 minutes of speech therapy or whatever. That's tough. You're also working against their developmental attention spans. Young kids aren't world renowned for their ability to focus on one task for 30 minutes. And it's not appropriate to expect them to do that. So
I would give anything
to fatigue out.
Yeah, I would give anything to be able to see my kids every day for a short period of time, because I do have so many kids who just cannot tolerate 30 minutes at a time. It's a little bit better when I do push in services into the classroom. It's a little bit less of a demand on the kids. But when if I have to pull kids out, which I do a lot, and if I have to see more than one kid at a time, I always pull them out, because it's hard. We're moving around all the time, and I'm not able to give sustained attention to 2 kids when they're on different sides of the room. So if I have to see kids in groups, I always pull them out. But it is very, very difficult to have a successful 30-minute session where all of that 30 minutes is we're learning. I would really, really love to do, 15 minutes every day with these kiddos, because in the 30-minute session, I might waste 15 minutes with redirections, giving breaks, or just helping re-regulate a child.
Yeah.
Which can be language support in and of its own if you have the resources to do like a sensory room. I would for sure do a language session in a sensory room, but my schools, we do not have access to things like that. So
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, even if a session is play-based, 30 minutes is still a long time for a kid to, it is that kind of like sustained energy or effort towards something. And so some of my really young clients that I see at my office, I will pull out maybe like 3 toys that I know they really love. And on a tough day for a toddler, at like minute 16 of our 30-minute session, they're in my cabinet pulling stuff, because we've already gone through all the games I pulled out and they're already like looking for more things. And, I'm kind of scrambling to get us back on track so I can actually target when I need to target and take data, but their attention span is just not long enough. And so, yeah, it takes a lot of finagling on the side of the therapist and the resources and support on the side of the school that are like available to us as well.
And that's pretty normal for a typically developing 3-4-year-old, is to have that short attention span. And when you add on the fact that, well, almost every single child on my caseload has a diagnosed disability of some kind through the school system, which often leads to lower than typical attention spans. A lot of my students have goals to maintain attention for 1 minute. So when you're looking at like, this child has a goal to do a task for 1 minute and I'm with them for 30 seconds, I do not have 30 activity plans.
Right.
So
yeah. And sometimes the data that we have to take is like, 80% of opportunities or 4 out of 5 opportunities or whatever. And if you have a kid that's jumping around like a flea on a hot rock, which, they come by it honest, but it can be really, really hard to even manufacture those opportunities for them to practice the skill that you're trying to take data on. So yeah, it's definitely, in my time in early childhood, I found myself wishing I was like an octopus and could like corral and move things. And
yes. There are times, especially when I really try to never see more than 2 kids at a time, because it turns into chaos so fast. Even if we have preferred activities and my behavior management that day is top tier, it just turns into chaos so quickly. So I try to never pull more than 2 kids at a time. But in those moments where I have 2 kids in the room and we're trying to either play a game or even do like a semi-structured activity, I wish I had 8 arms and maybe 4 legs, because holy smokes, if I am fast enough, if I can't get the game switched quick enough, I lose one and then I have to get that one back and I lose the other. And it is like putting on a show all day. You are a performer. You really have to keep their attention.
Yeah, it's definitely, in my experience from moving from early childhood to the elementary level, a lot of elementary school kids also have short attention spans. And we also encounter that problem with the school age group, but they know how to be at school a little bit more. So if I pick up a group of first graders and bring them into my therapy room and sit them down at the table, I know that they're just going to stay at the table while I pull out the materials. I don't have to worry about one of them getting up and getting into stuff or leaving the room, or, just because they kind of know the deal as they've been in school for 2 years. So yeah, especially those like fresh 3-year-olds that age in right when they turn 3 and they've never been to school before. They don't know like how to be a person in a group of people. That's one of the biggest like skills that early educators teach, I think, is just like, here's how we act in a group.
That's my fallback. If I have a bad day, or if a session went really poorly, or if the behavior management was not great that day, that is what I remind myself, is that if nothing else, we are teaching this child how to be in therapy.
Yes.
Because, the goal is to always not need therapy anymore, but many of our kids will at least have a couple years. And I often do end up sending my kids to kindergarten still needing therapy. And so on those days where it doesn't always go great, I'm telling myself, we're going to have sustained practice at this. And by the time they leave for kindergarten, by golly, they're going to know how to be they're going to know how to act in the speech therapy room. So that is kind of my goal for you all, setting you up at the elementary age, is to just kind of work out those kinks.
And
I didn't get any data taken that day.
Yeah.
And you know what? Let it be a testament to early childhood providers, because in kindergarten, you can always tell which kids went to early childhood and which ones did not, because the ones they know the school routine. They know the school routine because they've had a little bit of experience for that. So thank you, Chloe. I notice.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking, kind of as you were talking, Chloe, we have like a little Venn diagram of like practice experience going on, of like, Francie, your practice experience has been with school age predominantly. And Chloe, your experience has been with, you had some school age clients early on, but you've been mostly preschool, right?
I only did 1 year in the schools, and I was pre-K through 8, and then I
Okay,
went
that's what I thought.
pre-K the rest of the time.
Yes. And I have done both. I did early childhood, K-5, and now my caseload is almost entirely early childhood, 3 to 5, or even younger. I have a handful of toddlers right now too. And so I think that we all like definitely understand each other across this kind of like gradient of age and practice and stuff. But Francie, you saying that about you can tell which kindergartners had been to therapy beforehand or had even just been to school before coming in when they get to you. So Chloe, I want to know what you wish kindergarten IEP teams knew about upcoming preschoolers. And Francie, if you want to do the reverse of the question and say like what you wish preschool teams knew, maybe this could be like a moment where we bring connection and love between the preschool teams and the K-5 teams. I don't know. Are you guys down for that? Do you want to do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
So I think a lot of times we see a huge disconnect in curriculum between pre-K and kindergarten. And this is not necessarily just my kids on IEPs. This is just kind of across the board. And when we have our kindergarten transition meetings, we tend to see a heavy focus from the kindergarten team on like, well, what are their academic skills? How many letters do they know? How far can they count? And those very in line with the academic curriculum of kindergarten. That's what they really want to know, which doesn't always align to what our preschool curriculum is. And it doesn't align at all to our IEP goals because you cannot qualify for academics at the preschool level.
You also can't qualify in kindergarten. This has been a big conversation that I've been having recently with academic services because people be like, well, why didn't early childhood send them with academic goals? And I'm like, funny, you should say that. They're not appropriate at this age.
Because it is developmentally appropriate for all preschoolers to be learning these academic skills, even though oftentimes preschool teachers and the preschool team can tell you who is struggling with it and who is not. It's technically developmental for all preschoolers to be learning these academic skills. And I often see that at these kindergarten meetings, the kindergarten team is very preoccupied on that kind of stuff versus our preschool curriculum works a lot on, like you said, it's kind of just like teaching kids how to be at school. We are working a lot on social emotional regulation, which I know there's a big push for that, the older grades as well. I don't know if it's as much now as it was a couple years ago, but a lot of our curriculum is social emotional regulation. It's interacting with peers. It's working on inhibition. And because right now we have so many kids who have absolutely no impulse control. And if your child...
Every thought becomes an action. Yeah. Every thought is an outside thought.
Yes. Yeah. And so a lot of our, the preschool teachers are working on these academic concepts, yes, there is a growing disconnect between what we expect of preschoolers, whether that's the CDC regulations, your state guidelines, what pediatricians are telling you. What I'm seeing is a bigger gap in what we are expecting early childhood to do. We are lowering what we're expecting of those kids, at the same time raising the bar for the academic knowledge we expect kindergartners to know. And I would love that if more kindergarten teams would be more understanding, like this child may not know very many letters coming into you, but by golly, they're going to sit at their desk. They're going to be ready to learn. They're going to be a model student. They're going to be ready to learn and they will get there. Versus other kids who may know all 26 of their letters, but they're not going to be able to participate in any of your lessons. they're going to be disruptive. They're going to be, they're not going to be focusing on what you're saying. They're not going to be able to move past the memorization that they have right now type deal.
I feel like especially in this kind of early academic and developmental stage that we're talking about, memorization and like having learned something are two different things. Because a lot of kids can sing the alphabet song, but the application of that knowledge would be knowing the letter sounds, knowing how to like get the, we're talking kind of pre-literacy skills. So if a kid can like recite the alphabet, great. But do they have the like you said, the kind of being at school skills, the school readiness skills to sit down and then learn how to apply that string of letters that they've memorized? Because that's the real like meat of it there.
Yeah. And on our students who have IEPs, we do have, that is something that almost all of my students have, is goals for school readiness. And that's like where those paying attention to task goals come in, participating in a group activity come in, being able to work with peers in your space come in. Those are kind of the school readiness goals. And those are definitely more needed for our students with IEPs versus our typically developing peers. But that is something we focus on so much at the early childhood level that I feel like is overlooked by the older grades, because it's not what people typically envision as learning at school. When you think learning at school, you're thinking of those academic concepts. And so I do feel like that's where people come in, and you might not have a great vision of early childhood because like, oh, well, they don't do anything all day. There is so much going on in that classroom to prep those kids.
I just found out recently that the state of Missouri has an entirely separate standards set that they use exclusively for early childhood. And it's all developmental based. Like what you guys do is so functional and aligns with development. And so I would oftentimes say to kindergarten teachers, because they'd be like, well, why don't they have academic services? Is that like developmentally, they're not working on academics in preschool. Like that's just not appropriate. Everybody's learning their alphabet for the first time. Everybody's learning numbers for the first time.
Do you know what the Missouri Early Learning Standard is for letter knowledge going into kindergarten?
Share it.
Knows some letters. That's the standard.
Some.
It does not give a number, doesn't give, and it's just knows some letters. And it does in parentheses say like, particularly, hopefully the letters in their name is really all the, because we're in Missouri, I think you guys have said that before. So we're bound by those standards. Granted, school districts will have their own criteria. I do think mine has a criteria we try to meet that's higher than just some letters. But that's not a concept it's not a concept we work on with our students with IEPs who have other needs, unless it's like an area of interest. And it's not something we can work on if a child cannot sit and attend to an activity, if they cannot participate in a group activity, if they cannot focus and get their bodies settled to be ready to learn.
Yeah.
Granted, all the preschool teachers I know are absolutely amazing, and they will work on this anyway because there's so much on their plate that they have to do, and they know it's an expectation for kindergarten, and we always want them to be ready for kindergarten. But I think that those functional skills, those school readiness skills, those social emotional skills are the ones that get overlooked by the older teams.
I saw something online. I just followed somebody on Instagram who has been a teacher since the early 90s, and I'm totally blanking on her handle right now, but I'll see if I can find it and put it in the description or something. But she was responding to a commenter who had said like, why do kids need to color inside the lines? Just let them color, let them be creative. And she delivered this like masterclass in 90 seconds of like what a kindergarten or preschool teacher is doing when they're having kids sit and color inside the lines. Like, I don't know where this kind of like myth of like, we just like strap 3-year-olds to desks and force them to color inside the lines for 8 hours every day. Like, that's not what preschool is. I don't know where that came from, but yeah, it's not being mean. It's not quelching their creativity. She made the point that like kids have to know how to follow directions. That is a life skill. Being able to stay within the parameters of an assignment or a task given to you is a life skill. And so, yeah, it may seem mean or harsh or whatever to force a 4-year-old to color inside the lines on a coloring page, but it's teaching them that like tasks have parameters and we have to follow rules. And yes, that is a skill that we have to teach children. They don't just automatically know it.
Yeah. And if we just let them bypass all of the directions and do whatever they want on this activity, guess what they're going to do when they get to kindergarten? They're going to do the
color all over their writing prompt, right?
Yes, exactly. But yeah, so I think that is a really good point. And hearing you kind of lay it out like that, I'm realizing like, yeah, because having been on kind of both sides of these IEP transition meetings, there's this huge misalignment between standards for early childhood and kindergarten. So that might be where some of this kind of tension between those teams.
It just feels like we're continuously expecting less of our 3-year-olds, like with the CDC lowering their standards, and just from like what I've observed, even in the last 5 years, from what parents are expecting of their children. And I don't know if they're getting that information from their pediatricians or from the CDC or from wherever resources they are. We're expecting less of preschoolers. We're lowering their criteria to get services. It's harder to get services. And then kindergarten standards just keep getting higher. And so there's just a growing disconnect. And preschool teachers are trying so hard to try to bridge that gap in a system that's telling you, well, a 4-year-old doesn't need to do that. It's like, well, a 5-year-old has to do this, which is so much harder. And so it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think, France, as someone who kind of sits in on these meetings on the elementary side?
You know, I feel like I'm kind of in the minority when it comes to elementary providers who has, like, I only have love and the biggest admiration for early childhood providers because you guys do so much. The only, like, things that I can think about that I wish early childhood knew from us is just how different services are, because oftentimes early childhood services are delivered 100% self-contained, where in the elementary world, we have a whole variety of placement options that we can pick from. And so having those conversations ahead of time for each student to know what placement is going to be the most appropriate for them is going to be so vital in that childhood to kindergarten transition. So having those conversations, I think, is so important. Same for what minutes are going to look like. When we propose minutes for that new kindergarten IEP, having a really frank conversation with families and with each school's team will help to provide the best services for each child, because minutes look very different with you guys than they do with us. And so just open conversations. But I only have the biggest heart for EC. And so when people are like, oh, the EC, no, not in my house. We do not slander the early childhood providers in Ms. Collins' speech room. No.
Yes, I was going to say, I didn't like throw that question to you because you've been repeatedly hostile too.
Right.
I know that you have nothing but love for our preschool counterparts.
Love them.
Yeah.
It's not everybody though. I once walked into a kindergarten transition meeting where the principal was sitting in as the LEA, and he looked at the parent and said, okay, now the real work will begin. And I looked at him as the only representative from our early childhood program, and I said, we're doing real work in preschool too. This is actual legal paperwork. Like, this is real work. And then I reported it to my director.
Yeah, good.
One of the things that I find really special about early childhood is that you guys specifically, in Missouri, we have the YCDD code, right? Young Child with a Developmental Delay. And one of the things that I think is most unique that I hope you can speak to is talking about how you kind of deal more with delays than diagnosed disability. You do have diagnosed disabilities, but you are oftentimes catching kids up developmentally. Can you talk about how that is rewarding in and of itself, because it feels like it moves a lot faster, but also just how unique that is to be in such a short period of time that makes such an impact long term. So can you talk a little bit about catching kids up developmentally?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I feel like it's one of the reasons why I love working with preschool and like I said, catching those kids early is most of my caseload, yes, has the criteria of the young child with a developmental delay, meaning they don't have any other diagnoses in the school system. Sometimes they have outside medical diagnoses, but not always. And so I do work with a bunch of kids who may just have a genuine language delay. There's no other underlying cause. They just need a little boost. They need a little support. And so once we get those supports in place in the form of the language therapy or the support in the classroom, we do see these kids make pretty rapid gains. I see most of these kids some of my kids for 3 years, most of them for 2 years, depending on when their birthday is. And I have had kids start with me with 5 words, with just a young child with a developmental delay in the area of communication. No, there's other areas you can qualify in. This one's just communication. I've had them start with me for 5 words and leave for kindergarten telling full stories, which is just such incredible progress. That's going to go back to one of the things I love, one of those wins that I like to celebrate. And so that's pretty common to see at the early childhood level, which is different from the school age where things might go a little bit slower, because once a child gets into the school, you have to be reevaluated and you lose that criteria of the young child with developmental delay. You have to get that school age diagnosis. So it's really heartwarming to work with these kids that do have those true delays. And like I said, the goal is always not to be in therapy forever. And sometimes we send kids to kindergarten and they get evaluated in kindergarten and they don't qualify for anything. And so then they go into kindergarten, it's first grade now when you have to be evaluated, but then they go into first grade, second grade, not needing any services, which is incredible.
And that's one thing that I wish school teams knew, is that YCDD is for a short period of time, and that the goal is to not have it anymore. And so oftentimes I hear people be like, you're taking away their identification, but their YCDD going into school age. And I'm like, we're not though. They've done what YCDD was meant to do. And that's so awesome.
Yes. Because our kids, they qualify for this at 3. We often test kids, especially if they're coming from like our Missouri Early Learning 0 to 3 program for steps. If we do test them between the ages of like anywhere from 2.5 to 3. We test them before our early childhood program. So I'm often getting kids with testing done at like 2 years, 8 months that show that there's just a delay. They're so young that we don't always know what's going on. And so that's why we have the YCDD category catch-all, where you can qualify for adaptive, physical, social, emotional, communication.
Cognitive.
Cognitive. Yes, thank you. Most of my kids I see communication a lot. I see social, emotional a lot. Typically adaptive, cognitive, physical is going to come with an accompanying medical diagnoses. But most of the kids, we don't really know what's going on yet because they're so young. And so we're giving them time, we're not waiting to see, but we're giving them time with supports in place to see what comes of it. And sometimes we have kids not needing services anymore. Sometimes those kids end up with a medical diagnosis. Sometimes they end up with a school age diagnosis that's going to be more appropriate for maybe it does turn into a disorder instead of a delay. We never know, but we give them time to work on it.
That is such an excellent breakdown of why YCDD and those other kind of like umbrella diagnoses or identifications exist. Sometimes it's cut and dry. Kid comes in, we're like, oh, we see the signs of this, disorder, syndrome, what have you. We can identify and get going. But especially with those young kids, you're so right. Maybe it's a delay. They'll catch up and they'll be ready to go by the time they hit first grade. But some kids, it's really, really, really hard for us as practitioners to tell what those skills are going to look like 2 or 3 years down the road, so that it gives us kind of room to provide the support so that we're not like ignoring this need that we see. But also, you can't always tell right off the bat.
And absolutely. And another thing that makes YCDD really beneficial in early childhood, which is hard for, in my experience, it's been hard for the school age providers to kind of wrap their head around, is oftentimes at the school age, the services you have match the diagnosis that you have. With a young child with a developmental delay, you do not need to meet the specific criteria for example, you don't have to have a diagnosed delay in the area of physical development for us to provide to you physical or occupational therapy. Mm-hmm. Once you have that diagnosis of the young child with a developmental delay, you've been identified as a delay. And as a team, we can justify in the present level of your IEP the need for physical therapy services, occupational therapy services, language therapy, speech therapy, social work, you name it. So you don't need to meet the criteria for all of those categories to get those services, which is really awesome in terms of advocating for what kids need. And that has also been something that's been kind of hard moving up to the school age level. Is I've sent kids with speech minutes because often I get kids who are not talking at all. Mm-hmm. And after a year of services, they're talking so much, and now you can't understand anything they say. Their services have changed to needing all language to maybe half and half. I'll do 30 minutes speech, 30 minutes language, but their diagnosis is YCDD and communication. That's usually very different at the school age level, where they really need the speech impaired diagnosis. But if it's a need under YCDD, we can provide those services.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that miscommunication happens with the school team, because these kindergarten teachers are like, well, you're just stripping services away. Like, I don't understand why we're getting rid of all of these things. And it's just unfortunately the way that school age services are set up. It's just, that's the magic of early childhood, is you get this beautiful catch-all of YCDD and you get access to these things that just don't exist at the school age. And so I think it makes a little bit of miscommunication and almost a little bit, I wouldn't say resentment, but it definitely makes people get a little curmudgeon-y when they're like, but they got all this at early childhood. And I'm like, yeah, they did. That's how it's designed to work.
Yeah, the purpose is to front load our services now for the early intervention, for them to not need them later. But it can be really hard to use those services, especially if they've been successful.
Yeah.
But you brought up a really good point, that early childhood services are meant to be fated. That it is a small, really heavy dose of interventions to then hopefully catch them up to their same age peers so that they can continue on without needing much intervention at all. And I feel like people forget that. That's the purpose, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Chloe, I feel like you've said so many things that are really valuable for parents to hear about early childhood, especially early childhood language intervention. But if there was something like a message that you could give to parents of a child with a YCDD identification, or parents of a child with some kind of delay, what would it be? If you could give like something that you wish they knew.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not a parent. I will be a parent soon, but I'm not a parent right now. But I think that it's important for parents to know, even if your child gets that diagnosis of the developmental delay, your child is capable of so much. And it is still important to hold high standards for them, meet them where they're at, but continue to push those expectations for things that they can do. Oftentimes, that child will meet your expectations when given the correct supports. And that's where we come in as the school age team to help coach you, or as the school team to help coach you on what those supports may be, implementing those, and have those high expectations for your kids, because they will need it. We have meetings all the time where we say, your child's doing this at school, and they say they won't do that at home. Are you giving them the expectation to do these things at home? They won't get dressed at home, but they will at school. We give them the expectation to get dressed. They won't put their shoes on at home, but they do at school, because we give them, like, that is the expectation. We know they are capable of doing that, and we expect them to do it. Again, with the supports that they need. And I just wish more parents understood that.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that it can be very hard, especially if it's your first kiddo and you maybe don't know, or maybe it's your fourth kiddo and it's just your baby. But being in the preschool room, like we said earlier, our job is to get them ready to be at school. And part of that is going to be expecting them to do things on their own. I'm working on helping them make requests for themselves, to advocate for themselves, to protest for things that they don't want to do. And part of that is being able to do things independently.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so true. And I think this also falls into that kind of just like early childhood instruction and education piece, because a lot of these things are things that kids are not naturally inclined towards. Like, I don't know very many 3 or 4-year-olds that love putting away the Legos after they took them out of the bin, but they can do it. And we do it at school. So I know that they have the same, receptive language and fine motor skills to do it at home too. Those skills don't go away when we leave the room. But yeah, it's definitely tough, because sometimes it's stuff that is hard for them, A, because of a disability or identification of some kind, and B, it's just stuff that they don't want to do, because they're also human and they have things that they don't want to do sometimes.
Yeah, even whether it's, since I do spend a lot of time in the classroom, I do interact a lot with my typically developing peers, as well as my kids that I support directly. But one of the biggest things I see is just kids not expected to do anything at home, or they're not used to being given boundaries. And whether they're a typically developing child or a child who needs a little bit more support, or even kids who need lots of support, those boundaries are very, very important. We can tell almost immediately what kids have structure and boundaries at home and what kids don't.
Yep.
And it makes a huge difference in how they act at school. And sometimes a lot of our job is to teach kids those boundaries, teach them that, yeah, it's not fun to put your Legos away, but now we have to.
Yeah.
Or, no, you cannot have that friend's snack. That's not yours. And that's very, very difficult for some kids. And we can just tell what parents are enforcing those kinds of things at home and which ones are just kind of letting their child be.
Yeah. I would 100% agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours about this, and we do regularly in our free time, because we're friends and we talk about our jobs together all the time. But in the interest of being respectful of your time, what are some final thoughts, final questions? Maybe, France, if you have anything for Chloe right before we kind of sign off.
I'm trying to think. You're about to be a parent. Do you have any good parenting resources that you're like, hey, read this book? Or like what advice or like resources do you give to your parents that you work with?
One of the resources I go to a lot, especially for my early communicators, is the Hannon Center. If you're familiar with it, they have wonderful parent-friendly handouts, trainings. The trainings do cost money, and I would really love to become like a Hannon certified provider someday, but it's incredibly intensive and expensive. But they do have a bunch of free resources on their website that are like, they have programs such as It Takes Two to Talk, and it really coaches parents through how you can change how you're talking to your child to promote that early language. That's one of my absolute favorite resources to give out to parents, is anything out there by the Hannon Center.
Awesome. Yes, I have seen some of their like parent resources and have heard of the Hannon Center for sure. And yeah. I would second that. They rock. Very cool.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and sharing all your wonderful information about early childhood. I feel like this is a really special time in development that not a lot of people know are accessible to them in their communities or know exist at all. And so thank you for bringing a little bit more light and education to early childhood services.
Absolutely. Would recommend your local early childhood program. Please check it out. Any parent out there, check it out.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you so much, Chloe. This has been Tell Me About It, an SLP podcast. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify under Tell Me About It, an SLP podcast. And we are also on Instagram at Tell Me About It SLP. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.